Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond the Dashboard, Moving from AI Curiosity to ROI. This is Ashley Myers, HFMA's Client Services Specialist, and I will be moderating today's session. Now it is my pleasure to welcome today's speakers. Kirsten Largent, CPA, is CFO of OSF Healthcare, where she leads financial strategy for the integrated health system and also serves as CEO of Pointcore. With more than 30 years of experience in business and healthcare, she is known for advancing financial sustainability, value-based care, and innovation, with a strong focus on leveraging technology and AI to improve operations and expand access to care. Eric Webb is Chief Development Officer at Pointcore, where he leads strategy, business development, marketing, and strategic partnerships. With more than 30 years of executive leadership experience, he focuses on building strong collaborations and driving meaningful results in healthcare transformation. And with that, Kirsten, I'll turn this presentation over to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Ashley, for the introduction. I'm super glad to be here with this group. I saw some familiar names, but for those of you that I've not had the opportunity to meet, my name is Kirsten Largent, and I do serve in a dual role at OSF, CFO for the system, as well as leader for our enterprise services organization. I've been with OSF for over 30 years in a variety of roles, mostly in the finance area. Throughout my career, I've been focused on financial stewardship and long-term sustainability, but really increasingly over the last 5 years or so, that work has been inseparable from strategy and operational transformation. Most recently, stepping into the CEO role at Pointcore, that has really further expanded, my ability to connect strategy, operations, and finance all together in a more integrated and impactful way. And I'm hopeful that you'll see today some specific examples and strategies around that. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Eric, for some introduction comments.
Thank you, Kirsten. I appreciate it. I do not have 30 years of experience. However, I've been here for about 8 years. And really, my role at Pointcore has been to help the company evolve and transform as we think about our role of not only serving OSF, but a variety of clients where we're here to help transform and support the operational side of healthcare, really the back office side. For quite some time, we talked about, you go focus in on a patient, let us take care of the rest. And we've been successful at doing so through a variety of solutions that really enable care to be delivered, from technology services or supply chain capabilities, our facilities management and construction, and really trying to create the right environment for care. We also recognize that care costs money, and our ability to be a diversified revenue stream supporting other organizations has been a key role of being innovative, providing wonderful, unique solutions, and really creating strategic partnership that impact patient care and those that deliver that care. Being connected to OSF, we like to suggest that in many ways, we're a healthcare system helping other healthcare systems. We have a tremendous capability of serving a very large organization like OSF, and I know those on this call have ranges from quite a bit larger than OSF to maybe a little bit smaller. But at the end of the day, our ability to create solutions that not only serve OSF, but in turn can be available for other healthcare systems really allows us to leverage the strengths and the capabilities and the desires that we have as potentially being partners to many others. We have been transforming the delivery of services, and at the end of the day, elevating care for OSF and other hospitals and systems we serve. So I just like to say thank you for your time today during this webinar. We're really glad that you're here. And maybe as we kind of set the stage, we are having a few poll questions, and I think it's important that maybe we turn this over to the audience first and get some input from you. Our desire really is to setting the stage of shifting from curiosity to competency when it comes to AI. There's a lot of discussion around that today in the industry. We're certainly going to be highlighting capabilities of that today. It's certainly much more of a buzzword, or it's much more than a buzzword. But sometimes, depending on where you are comfortable in your use, will allow how much scale and capabilities you have. So before we dive too deeply, where is your organization in its use of AI today? There are some that understandably might not be utilizing it all. There are some that might be really dove in early and quite deeply and could be scaling it across the organization. As I think about this, and Kirsten, I'd be interested in your perspective, where OSF Healthcare sits in this continuum of not using it to using it, in significance, scaling across our organization.
Yeah, certainly growing in our use of AI. And I'll be curious to see what the results are. And I know if we had taken this poll question 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the results will be dramatically different, I suspect, than what we'll see today. And here we go.
Here we go. No surprise, a relatively typical bell curve in this. And it'll be interesting as we go through today's discussion as to exploring perhaps why. Why are we not utilizing AI today? Or how did we get to the competency of being able to scale across the organization? But I would say that this is certainly quite representative of what I was expecting. And in some areas, there could be different aspects of a healthcare system where you may be utilizing AI, but not utilizing it in others. So those results certainly could vary.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that poll. I really do appreciate that. Kirsten, go ahead.
Yeah, when we, just thinking about not only the prevalence of AI in the healthcare industry, but how we've shifted. We think about the discussion a few years ago, we were focused a lot on that clinical experimentation, and now moving more towards, or in a more rapid pace, to operational necessity. We used to talk about primarily pilots and thinking about predictive models for sepsis, imaging, a lot of discussion in that space, and that continues to grow. But today, if I think about at OSF and talking to colleagues across the country, it really is embedded in our day-to-day work for running the healthcare system. I know we use it in supporting revenue cycle, staffing decisions, supply chain, patient access. And really, I think about it, it's no longer a nice to have innovation. It really has become essential to maintaining our margins, improving throughput, and sustaining of operations. If I think about my dual role, I get to see both sides, kind of the health system operations, as well as some of the enterprise services that Eric was talking about earlier. And I think while different, the common thread through both has moved really from should we explore AI to where AI is required to remain competitive and sustainable.
Yeah, I think to that point, when you think of clinical experimentation, for a while, it was almost a novelty to try it. It was part of our innovation area versus now it is unequivocally core. And in many cases, and again, I think this varies of applicability and applications of AI, it is absolutely moved to that operational necessity. So if you think about it, is absolutely tied to uptime and throughput in many, many areas that we have. It is embedded in our day-to-day operating rhythms as an organization. Like, what do we do if we don't have it, right? I mean, the most nervous aspect is what if our EHR is not working, right? But now it is like, what if these tools that are embedded in EHR or embedded in other applications are not available to us? We've actually become dependent on them, and that's a good thing, because we have built so much infrastructure and back office capabilities to help these scale. And I think that has been the real pivotal point of moving from experimentation to necessity, is our ability to scale. And it's moved from like almost this data science project to now it's an operational product that has been really institutionalized. And I think about the only way we're able to get there successfully for OSF Healthcare is through that governance process and making sure that we had a really clear strategy of what we were going to do, what we are not going to do, and how do we manage the risk associated with that. And I think You've certainly been leading many aspects of that team with colleagues from OSF Healthcare. I think that that has worked out really, really well of understanding the constraints that we need to have while also maybe opening the floodgates a little bit, right, to allow those risks to be minimized through a great governance structure to support the need for AI to become a novelty to a necessity.
Absolutely.
Maybe as we think about a broader case of AI usage and you think about what's happening globally, you almost can't avoid it at any time, right? I mean, whether it's the stock market talking about it or overall, growth of what's happening with AI in general, the day-to-day almost applicability personally and certainly professionally, it is going to continue this significant growth that's there. And I think everywhere we turn, whether it is things related to our individual applications that we might have as leaders, whether it is how we are integrating this as departments and systems, we are going to continue to see this growth, not only of things that we might leverage growth internally, but also with all of our partners, the EHR partners that I mentioned before. Kirsten, you mentioned imaging partners. I mean, AI is just becoming absolutely a instrumental part of anything tied from a technology perspective that's supporting our imaging business. And certainly there are other departments where, I could almost not even imagine your team's rev cycle processes without AI today.
Exactly. They would throw me out if we took away the AI tools.
Yep, that's right. That's right. And you think about how this ties to the previous poll that we just had. I think we're going to see that bell curve shift, just like we see this AI usage shift going up to the right. So what powers the AI technology? Part of it is digital twin, right? And whether it's a digital fabric, a digital twin, whichever buzzword, I mean, realistically, this layer of technology really powers the applicability and the use of AI and helps it get it to scale. I think without the ability for us to connect to different systems without changing those systems, AI would be a much more significant struggle to get day-to-day use out of and create this level of applicability than we have now. So if you think about this digital twin technology combining with AI, you're absolutely able to get the scale and be able to utilize it very, very effectively in the operations. So when I think of digital twin technology, Kirsten, in your case at OSF Healthcare, we've really done, I think, a good job of connecting systems of records, right? The EHR, the ERP, the HR solutions, other finance tools that you have, whether it's managing biomedical equipment in those databases, none of those have changed. But we have made connections to all those systems of record. And we've really created this digital duplication of those. But what's interesting about it is this virtual fabric has really created a continuously updated representation of the business. And all these systems of record have turned really into systems of action when you apply AI to it. And I think that is how the model has worked so successfully rather quickly. I mean, to your point, we've been talking about AI for the past couple of years, but it's really, you can almost count it in quarters of where it's really seen a level of applicability. And I think that's because we've better enabled the digital twin technology. We felt more comfortable with AI. We've allowed the governance process to allow us to move forward. And it's really created, I think, a very significant impact on OSF Healthcare, just like I would imagine, especially in those poll numbers of those that were leaning into this more to the right of that scale, has made an impact on large healthcare systems. So any comments from your perspective related to the fabric that exists with all those systems and how you feel it's enabled AI?
Yeah, if I think about, we always talk about we have a ton of data, but how do we turn that data into knowledge? And I think this technology sets us up beautifully for that. Before, or even currently in some cases where we've talked about we need a new system. like this particular system isn't giving us the intelligence that we need. Our decisions at that point was, well, let's change out the system. And now we can layer this digital twin technology on top of all of our existing systems and tools and very rapidly get to that intelligence and data that we need in order to make strategic decisions. I know we'll go through a couple of specific examples, but I think at that higher level, it's that ability to get to that intelligence in a very quick, and as we're informed and we want to ask different questions and learn and change, we can quickly adjust to that.
One area that I found very fascinating is, to your point of not changing systems or saying we don't have a capability, all of a sudden you realize that data that exists in different places and different systems, when it comes into this digital twin, you all of a sudden see a relationship with that data that perhaps you didn't see before. And I think it allows your leadership team to interact with the data differently, to try and understand different scenarios and what's happening to predict, downstream impacts before really taking action, where we might have been a little bit blinded to that before. And because maybe we were blinded, it's like, okay, we need to rip and replace, or we need to do something more significant. And we all know the time that it takes for that to happen. I think the beauty of a digital twin that powers AI is how quickly we can make those connections happen for you. And instead of going through an entire process of system selection and capital funding and implementation and things like that, you make a connection to a system or a part of the system or some sort of data element, and then you can see those relationships for leaders totally differently than we've ever had in the past. So I think it removes a significant amount of constraints, and it allows speed to be on our side so we can deliver more value more quickly to more constituents.
Absolutely.
Let's do another poll if we could. This will be poll question number 2. And where do we believe AI has the greatest impact in healthcare today? There are lots of advances in healthcare. We've talked about a couple of them: clinical care, rev cycle, workforce productivity. It's interesting, Kirsten, I think you mentioned all 4 of these in the use that you have. Probably one that's certainly near and dear is rev cycle, of course, but also workforce productivity and supply chain and clinical care. Any comments on how you see advancements within your world as you layer strategy to operations to financial management?
Sure. If I think about where we're using it most robustly, it is probably in those back office areas. And I think the opportunities in the clinical space is endless, but we proceed with caution in those places, obviously, with safety and quality being our number one primary issue in that space, moving forward. But in that back office space, if I think about, rev cycle, where we're bringing in all of the revenue, and then on the expense side, I know at OSF about 70% of all of our expenses is in workforce and supplies. And so most certainly there. And this doesn't surprise me, these results.
Me neither, but I also think about on the clinical care, some elements of how it's being utilized through SF Healthcare is more tied to workforce productivity in the clinical care setting than it is to actually the diagnosis of clinical care and potential outcomes. Well, I am certain that as an industry, we will see that shift over time. But to your point of being cautious and just wanting to make sure that, as providers, we always have the human elements of quality and patient care. Maybe we'll appreciate the productivity improvements, but we're not going to quite give up the controls of truly how to serve a patient with the greatest care.
For sure. If we think about in the finance area, are places where we can move more quickly. I think on the next slide, kind of those untapped areas of opportunity from a financial perspective. This is really where the opportunity is most tangible and how we can get to it most quickly. Thinking about supply chain leakage or asset management, those aren't just theoretical inefficiencies. We're really talking about real green dollars that are leaving our system. And every dollar that we don't optimize in that space are dollars that we can't reinvest into patient care, access, or our strategic growth initiatives. What AI enables us to do is to move kind of from the hindsight to the foresight, as I was mentioning earlier, from reacting to problems and to be more proactive in identifying those areas and preventing them before they even happen. And just as important is increasing our decision velocity, our tremendous capabilities and growing in that space. Capital planning, near and dear to my heart, is a great example from where this becomes really very real. Every healthcare system on this call, regardless of size, struggles with this process. I can guarantee it. It's complex, it's very time intensive, and it often becomes a balancing act between competing priorities. I have been doing capital planning at OSF for more than 30 years. We've never, not one single year, had enough dollars allocated to capital to meet all the very important capital needs that we have. And if I think about the challenges in this space, there's four that I can think of on the screen. First, just the sheer time investment. It takes months, can take months of coordination across all different teams, whether it's clinical, focus on the markets, the infrastructure needs, our strategic growth projects. Second, decisions really can drift towards the most persuasive voices rather than the strongest data. And how do we come up with a more data-driven and less emotional response? Third, we're often working across many fragmented systems that don't have that unified view that we were talking about, with this giving us an opportunity to pull that together. And then finally, there is a tendency to look in a very short-term perspective. What are we feeling the pain in today? And without that full visibility into what are our long-term implications and needs of the organization. It's so important for us to be thinking about a combination it's difficult to ensure that capital is being deployed optimally to make sure we're answering the long-term needs of the organization at the same time, and in coordination with balancing our balance sheet, making sure that we're not holding on to too much cash, but that we're investing in order for us to grow at the same time that we're being good financial stewards of the balance sheet.
I think related to this capital planning considerations, and you think about the influence of AI into this and what has been done at OSF Healthcare, particularly in the biomed space or the healthcare technology management space, where literally hundreds of millions of dollars of assets are sitting there, just in many cases waiting to be replaced. And how do we plan for that and things like that? And to your point of maybe an evidence-based approach into that, I think today with the tools that have been enabled at OSF Healthcare, there is more transparency to the 86,000 assets that we have to actually plan for. So not only do you have that level of transparency, but then to your point, you get much more proactivity related to reactions of, we're always going to have emergencies, of course, and we're going to talk a little bit about, one small case study of how we've utilized this, but this predictive opportunity to look into the future and have much better evidence-based approach to life cycle and planning and what capital needs are going to be. I think you've changed a little bit when I know you love the short-termism. I mean, there are some areas where you now have 5, 7, and 10-year forecasts of what is going to be needed for the $1.2 billion worth of capital assets you have that are listed as biomed.
Yeah, we can plan for it. And, it's no longer, I need more money.
Yeah.
I remember I said, okay, but how much do we need? And it really is just focused on that day. And if we plan and spend in a regular, routine, thoughtful process, then we avoid, as we were saying earlier, we avoid those problems and those emergencies from happening.
It feels like we're due for another poll question. Maybe poll question number 3. These are perfectly timed out, almost at 10 minutes. I don't know how exactly that happened, but poll question number 3. How often does your organization revisit major operational or capital decisions? And we just spoke about capital planning. We spoke about the ability to be proactive in that, which has been an evolution, right? I mean, there's been a lot of times where I know there's been significant transformation led by you, Kirsten, of the capital planning process. But there has always been these emergency situations. There's always been these changes for likely all the right reasons. Any thoughts related to the changes that need to happen in operational or capital decisions in terms of its frequency from your perspective?
Sure. I almost want to say all of the above, right? So we like to say we're in a continuous planning process where we're always thinking about what are our needs over the next year, over the next 5 years. And we don't just do that once a year. We know what's happening on a daily basis. And so we need to always be putting those ideas and requests into our tools and systems at all time. At the same time, we do need, we annually look and refresh our strategy and think about what do we need from an investment perspective to support our strategy. And then, even monthly as out of cycle requests come up, et cetera, we think about it that way. So I almost want to say all of the above. We have certain things that we always do on a annual basis, and then we also continuously plan. That's what I've been trying to talk to the organization about. We don't have surprise, you need a chiller. Like we know when those are going to happen. And, these tools help us have that long-term view.
Well, that's similar to the responses in poll question number 3. And I'm glad the smallest bar on there is only when issues arise. There are certainly going to be those emergencies, but to your point of doing certain things annually that we'll review quarterly, and again, that continuous review of these operational and capital decisions, it sounds like you're quite aligned with the rest of our audience, which is great.
Awesome. I think in the next section, when we evaluate our investments in AI across the organization or advanced technology, we do try to stay very disciplined. And these are the 4 areas that I really like to focus on for my CFO lens. And first, ROI. We have to also move beyond kind of the soft or theoretical benefits. We need to build the discipline to look for what is that measurable impact? Is it cost reduction, creating capacity, or improving our capital allocation? Those are measurable. And I think building in that discipline to measure those and ensure that we are getting the benefits. So if we're implementing an initiative using AI or technology and our goal is to release capacity, are we really taking advantage of that release of capacity and measuring that? Second, thinking about healthcare expertise. This isn't a space where generic solutions translate easily. We're very specific and complex and understanding. So, we need partners and work with partners who understand the complexity of healthcare operations. Third, if I think about technical readiness, and so, what does that mean for our existing systems? Are we adding complexity, or are we starting to integrate in a way that really enhances what we already have? I think it can be both, and we really leaning heavily on those investments that we've already made. And then finally, our future potential. That it's not just about solving today's problem, but also creating a platform so it sets us up for broader transformation. I mean, ultimately, it's not about the one use case. It's about building AI capabilities across our platform.
Kirsten, when I think about these considerations as well, I start where you do ROI, right? I mean, it is very, very critical, and we've got some wonderful ways to measure that. And I think where we have been able to get to in supporting OSF in these is a totally different view of KPIs and different metrics to support, not just did we save time, but actually operational KPIs and what was the influence that we had on hard dollars tied to supplies, or can we rent less equipment and do a better job of planning for that equipment? Can we stop the rush purchases, right? And if we look at the data through better asset availability, through optimizing different things in supply chain and or our biomed teams or in IT, I think we've really been able to get a different focus on SLAs and KPI measurement to really ensure that we have tangibility to the ROI measurement. And yes, totally appreciate the importance of a dollar, but even related to just preventing certain expenses, right? Cost avoidance, and different ways to look at our KPIs, I think has been a major driver of how you and the rest of the leadership team have been able to measure a return on investment, because it is more than dollars, even though dollars are a major driver.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about cost, but there's also opportunities in increased access, our ability to look at how are we scheduling procedures or activity and make the most use of that to increase the ability to serve, create access. Does impact dollars as well, but I mean, it's both sides, both expense and revenue opportunities.
Yeah, in one particular case, Kirsten, you've made some significant investment when it comes to imaging equipment.
That's
and
right.
imaging equipment that is faster, higher quality, allows schedules to change and create more slots for patients. And to your point, creating that access. And not only is that a better quality image, but it actually has more patients can be served, and therefore more revenue opportunities. And then I get to the industry data. I really like the way you put it. I mean, we are complex, right? I mean, it's not just IT, it's healthcare IT, right? And that is a big thing. The DNA of a healthcare system is very different than just about any other industry. And when things are critical, right, they're critical because they're potentially life-saving and they're touching a patient. And I think the more that we can make investments to enhance the ability to serve in those critical moments, I think we've done a lot of that. And in some of your examples, you talk about HTM and or operational improvements with nursing and providers and things like that. And yes, of course, you need supplies to be able to offer that. And that industry data and specific expertise, that's why Pointcore is so proud to be part of a healthcare system, helping other healthcare systems to enable quality care to be delivered. And then if I could just comment on the technical readiness, you made a mention earlier of maybe needing to swap out systems, but because of that digital fabric, we didn't have to. I think that when we invest in technology, we're doing more protection of those existing systems, those systems of record, right? We have hundreds of different applications when it comes to technology, and trying to minimize those, one, for cost, but two, just easier integration, easier ability to serve, try and remove some of the complexity in a major complex situation has been a great opportunity to reduce the number of systems, create those connections, those systems of record, so that action could really happen. And again, those are all really, those three really focus in on the now. I really like your perspective on focusing in on the future. And not only is it new ideas of investing technology, but then that comes to new partnerships, right? I mean, who are the new players that could enable those new frontiers to become a reality even faster? So really like your view on investing in technology.
About another poll question. Go to the next one. So if we think about what is your primary barrier to AI investment? I think what we typically see, so looking at is a lack of interest, don't really need it, lack of being able to prove the ROI, lack of expertise, or concerns about governance. So I know what we typically see, and I suspect that we might see it here too, is that the biggest barrier is not interest, it's more confidence. So, confidence, do we really have an ROI? Confidence in the governance. We know that it's complicated depending on what area of the organization that we're looking at, and confidence in the ability to execute. I think that's why moving from pilots, which has been very prevalent over the last few years, to a scaled impact is so important, so that we can start building up that confidence and getting that experience. And then we start thinking with this in mind. So I know for my team, part of their goals for the year is, how are you going to use AI this next year? And so, yeah, no surprise, lack of interest is 1%. So I'd be curious who's not interested, because it's super cool. But kind of again, just more of that confidence in those other areas. I don't know, Eric, any thoughts from your perspective on this?
I think what provides that confidence, and you made this comment early on, is aligning it to the strategy, the broader strategy that is led by OSF Healthcare, and being able to execute that strategy. Because there have been such advancements within OSF from an AI perspective, it becomes integral, right, to the day-to-day execution of what it means to be, strategically successful. And I believe that some of the struggles of the past, and even maybe some of our early adoption, we weren't exactly sure how it was going to align to our strategy. And that gets to, maybe governance. Governance could be, yes, associated with decision making and decision rights and things like that. But it's also, how does this align to the strategy? And I think if you start with governance there, you have a real opportunity to advance that a little bit more quickly. Why don't we move on? And I think when you contemplate leveraging technology, and we'll dive a little bit further into capital planning, but I'll tell you, when we first put this in place within Pointcore, trying to serve OSF Healthcare, we had some of those similar challenges. Frankly, we over-engineered it. We over-engineered, thinking that AI, as a buzzword at the time, right, was going to solve all of the problems. And we said, let's put everything in there, and let's make sure that we can solve all the problems. And we got too bullish on what we thought it could solve, and we had to pause. We had to pause because some of our teams were trying to replace those systems of record, and you just didn't need to do that. Like, we didn't realize the power of the digital fabric, right? The digital twin that we could create. And we didn't need to replace certain aspects of the ERP or certain aspects of the EHR. And so when we paused, we realized that creating that fabric and allowing those systems of record to take place and remain, while putting AI on top of it, all of a sudden, we propelled our ability to see data very differently. We didn't need to change systems of record. We didn't need to try and replicate those. And all of a sudden, we started validating these relationships between operational impact and the data that we could see. And we just gained so much clarity so quickly once we realized that we over-engineered it, and we were honest with ourselves and needed to pause for just a moment. But then how quickly we were able to see results. And so while I'm, somewhat frustrated over the need to pause, it was a really good opportunity to realize why we did it and the impact of unpausing and finding new ways for that to happen. So these new insights really helped us make totally different recommendations of working with supply chain leadership. They were able to really be able to understand really significant cost advantages that maybe they didn't have before. Saw the same in our HTM business. And these efforts allowed us to not only make better decisions, but they really impacted the processes going forward for executive leaders. And you were talking about capital planning being so time intensive, and that's not time intensive for a low wage employee. That's time intensivity for executive level wages. And let's comment on the reduction of work hours spent on just asset planning in one area of capital planning tied to HTM.
Absolutely. Yeah, we did a similarly, we eliminated the traditional operating budget and moved to a rolling forecast, eliminated thousands of hours, and just following that same process. Then into this place, we saw, significant streamlining of the process. Some very tangible examples of savings. In the asset management area, we do have very tangible results. We're able to identify opportunities to redistribute existing assets, avoid the unnecessary purchases that we talked about, and improve just our fleet utilization. I mean, we saw documented $600,000 in cost avoidance. We had $3 million in released capital that we did not need to spend. We were more thoughtful in our purchasing. And then again, just the additional labor savings through that more efficient scheduling. So tremendous specific cost savings.
And this is really just tied to one modality in our capital planning process in the biomed space. And you think about multiplying this over to much larger investments. I mean, patient monitoring is critically important, but then you think about all of the diagnostic imaging equipment and surgical robots and everything else that you approve on an annual basis, which I know OSF providers greatly appreciate. This one example can be multiplied over and over and over again for a real success story. So I think it's great. I think it's great that we found a way to allow systems to create a level of transparency, and then really create, formulas behind it of how we should make better decisions. And going back to less emotion, more evidence, this is a perfect case for that.
Yeah, and just to underscore again, all this was done without replacing existing systems. It was just making better use of the data that we already had. So I think, all wins from a financial lens for sure. If we move on here, Eric, why don't, if we think about learnings from all of this and moving, beyond just the dashboard, a few key takeaways from my perspective, and I'd love to hear yours too. But, first, alignment and governance are critical. Again, back to that confidence and getting the organization comfortable and moving forward in a rapid way. This is, it's not a technology first initiative. It's really a leadership initiative. Second, innovation doesn't have to be disruptive. Some innovation this does not have to be. Some of the most effective approaches are layered into our existing workflows. I think we talked about some of those examples, whether it's in the asset management or in scheduling and patient access. It's just helping and improving those processes. I think third, starting with the problem, not the technology. So we don't have a solution looking for a problem. We're starting with what problems are we trying to solve? And that's really allows us to scale the success into many other areas as well. And finally, which we've mentioned a few times here, is thinking long term. The organizations that will benefit the most treat this as a capability, not just a project or a tool. It's really building this capability into our DNA as an organization. What are your thoughts, Eric?
Well, I think across AI and trying to get it throughout a healthcare system, there's a couple different ways to do it. One, I agree with all of your perspective. It does, in fact, start with governance and making sure that there is leadership alignment on how we want to leverage AI to solve business challenges. And in some cases, there are applications that we can build ourselves and have, and there are other applications that that you could leverage from other partners that are integrated in other solutions. If you think of the EHR, clearly AI is becoming almost inherent in many key aspects of an EHR, and that's going to grow. I've mentioned the imaging systems. There is no imaging system and the technology that surrounds it without the applicability of AI. But to your point, I do believe it's really important to consider AI as now part of the enterprise operating model, right? And it's not there just for novelty's sake. It is there as part of the strategy. It is there as part of the leadership alignment. It is there as part of the government. And you're right, it is there to solve challenges and do so more quickly with better efficiency and hopefully with better outcomes associated with that. I think it's also important to think about making sure that the technological data foundation of an organization is ready to accept it, right? We always talk about making sure that OSF Healthcare is 2 to 3 years ahead of a business need from a technology perspective. So when there is this ability to apply innovation, we don't have to wait for servers or networks or infrastructure to be upgraded. It's already there and ready for the business need because OSF has identified an opportunity and we want to apply, technology to that opportunity as quickly as we can. And then let's be very honest of talking about the importance of workforce adoption, right? And maybe one of the more challenging struggles is the change management associated with that. And you certainly have naysayers, but some of your best evangelists are those people that didn't think that they wanted to leverage AI, and then all of a sudden saw the power of it, and they became great cheerleaders, I think, for workforce adoption. But that change management is critically important. And that needs to be very much a part of the strategy. And some of the learnings that we have early on, you don't realize how important that is because you get a few that are leading some initiatives around AI. Of course, they're going to feel great about it. But then you have, in our case at OSF Healthcare, 27,000 mission partners, that need to accept it in varying different ways, of course. And you want to make sure that that change management is part of it. But at the end of the day, it is that strategy that must align to the technology that we want to have in place and do so that we have all the resilience and compliance and everything else that initial phase of governance is going to set forth. And then I think you have a great opportunity to be successful. Again, whether you build it yourself, leverage it from other partners, or buy certain applications that are going to help drive some of those AI capabilities.
Yeah, just underscoring your comment about, making sure that your mission partners, those employees across your ministries, have the right visibility and education. I know when we were setting up our governance structure, an entire work stream dedicated to education. And then from there, the storytelling and sharing of examples is super powerful. And you're right, it just kind of builds that confidence, and then people are seeking it out as opposed to, this is being done to me. It's, well, how come I can't? I want that cool opportunity as well. So yeah, that's a great point.
We saw that amongst our physicians very, very quickly. And we would tell that story of what it meant for pajama time. I remember Dr. Fitch talking about that as he was evangelizing the power of AI for physician productivity. As one kind of funny example when you think about listening to that video at all those meetings that you held.
Right. I think we're nearing the end, and I believe we have some time to open it up for Q&A.
We do. Thank you so much, Kirsten and Eric, for this really engaging presentation. I would like to invite everyone listening to enter your questions into the Q&A box located on your computer screens. I'll start with the first one. Kirsten, it's for you. It says, from a CFO perspective, what made AI shift from a nice to have to a must have?
Good question. I think for me, when I think about when it became a must have, really when that gap widened between the complexity of what we were managing, whether it was insurance payer policies or complex legislation, and that gap between that complexity and the tools that we had to manage it, that was really where it became, we must have this in order to just perform our normal operating duties. Traditionally approaches, the traditional way that we tried to tackle those problems just simply can't keep pace with not only the complexity, but also the volume of data and the speed in which we need to make decisions today. it really was at that point where it kind of shifted from optional to essential.
Thank you. The second question says, where do you see organizations getting stuck when trying to move from AI pilots to real ROI?
Maybe I'll take that one. I think first it begins with failing to understand what it means to truly implement at scale. There are wonderful opportunities for pilots to happen, but if we are not trying to solve that business need that Kirsten mentioned earlier and thinking about how to get that to scale, you might have pilot success, but that doesn't equate to production reality. And that is a big, big issue, I believe, because you could have this wonderful, solution that solves a problem, but maybe you weren't solving the real problem that needed to be solved. And if you can't get that ability for change management to happen and get things at scale, it's that novelty, right? And it doesn't turn into a necessity. So I think pilot success does not equal production reality is number one. I think number two, and Kirsten talked about this when thinking about investment in technology, was an unclear definition of what it means for return on investment, right? Because if it's not clear that we are going to get, in fact, the return that are necessary to deploy this at scale, it's not going to get deployed at scale. And making sure that there is this real solid business model about return on investment of this, technological advancement, you're just not going to get enough inertia behind it. I mentioned before about making sure that the technological infrastructure can support it. I mean, you hear all the time about data centers being built and this and that, external. Well, if internal to the organization, the network can't handle it, or the servers and storage capacity can't handle it, all of a sudden you've got data and integration bottlenecks that are going to slow things down, and you're going to lose momentum, right? This pilot success can't get to a production reality because the technology won't let you get there. And then I'll close with two more, and one of them Kirsten mentioned, of governance. If this solution is not tied to the governing strategy of how to leverage AI or other technology, it is not going to become part of the operating model of a health system going forward. And then finally, a great solution really doesn't mean anything if you can't get employees behind it and go through that change management process to adopt it in day-to-day operational capacities to solve the business challenges that we know exist. And we also know inherently that AI can help solve that, even from personal use of ChatGPT. That it could help advance, those challenges into solutions. If that workflow and change management doesn't happen for employees, it's not going to get to scale. And I think those are the key items that prevent AI pilots to see real ROI.
Thank you, Eric. I think that kind of segues into two of the questions that have popped up a couple of times, is how do you introduce this kind of technology without disrupting existing systems? And then what kind of training opportunities do you suggest to go along with them?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, Eric, and then if you want to jump in.
Please.
I think, we have been very intentional about layering the solutions into our existing processes. Again, so it's not replacing existing processes, it's layering into them, and it's a tool. AI isn't a thing, it really helps, and existing processes get better. And I think that really does reduce the resistance and accelerate the adoption when it's solving a problem. Again, we go back to, we must start this with defining what problem are we trying to solve, and not trying to force technology or AI advancement into our existing processes. So understanding what that problem is first, and then demonstrating how this will solve it, really does help not only avoid disruption, but encourage adoption and usage of it. Anything to add, Eric, on that one?
Yeah, just going back to the foundation that AI sits on top of. In the case for OSF Healthcare, it's that digital twin, it's that digital fabric that creates that duplication of systems of record without replacing them. And honestly, that has been, the number one driver of speed, because we haven't had to replace those systems. Now, we had to have the right applications, we had to have the right business need and the problems to solve. But because we didn't change those systems and we simply made connections to them and created this digital duplicate, it really allowed speed to happen. And what it also provided was no disruption of existing systems, while also playing this really important role of monitoring and governing the data of what goes in and what goes out. PHI and other sensitive data is critically important. And when you can monitor it the way in which we have been able to ensure that in a healthcare setting, we're not going too far, sharing too much data. And that, I believe, those two areas of that digital twin, but also governing the data that exists, have been really solid ways to ensure that we could get to scale without the significant disruption that might have otherwise come in if we had to replace an ERP system because we weren't getting the right outputs out of that system from one to another. And we all know that decision-making process and implementation process is years versus months when it comes to the ability to apply AI on top of a digital twin.
To the second part of the question regarding education, we have been very intentional about making education about AI part of our annual learning. So as we are, completing our annual compliance education, we have a module for AI, one just to demystify some of what we mean by AI and the terminology and the different types, as well as providing examples and use cases. We also have, for those that would like more advanced information or training, we offer that next level of training as well. And then upskilling all of our leaders across the ministry to be able to then work and educate and talk to their those that they lead about AI.
That phased approach of training aligns also to some cases the phased approach of deployment of applications, right? Where, you just didn't go all in a certain application. You might have, started with providing different types of visibility or transparency to data, maybe a little bit of decision support, and then expanding into, okay, now I can use this very operationally into making sure that my workflow, whatever that workflow might be, is now leveraging the full power of AI. So, as we've kind of scaled training, and I think you used demystify. I think that was one of the training modules that was out there, was demystifying AI. You did the same in the rollout of it. And I think that really helped to adoption and help people train as they needed to along the way in a phased approach, just like we rolled out in many cases some of the AI initiatives throughout OSF Healthcare in a phased approach as well.
Thank you both. I know that there's some other questions that we didn't get to answer, and I'm sure the team at Pointcore will be happy to address them afterwards. Do either of you have any closing remarks?
I might just offer, thank you so much for attending the session, and looking forward to the annual conference. To hope to see you all there. Really at the end of the day, that I think my party message would be AI is not about the technology itself. It's really about enabling us to make better decisions. If I think about healthcare, better decisions translate into better outcomes for our patients, as well as the organizations that we work in. So, we'll continue to evolve and see changes exponentially. I think, as every month, every week, it feels like every minute there's something new. So I'm very excited as a healthcare leader thinking about AI and where that'll take us into the future. Eric?
Yeah, I'll echo the thank you for your engagement and your participation. Very much appreciate that. My comment to close is, this really helps us take advantage of the limitations that we all know exist, right? We have limits of our time. We have limits of our personnel resources. We certainly have limits of cash and capital, right, Kirsten? And some of the abilities for AI really helps us get more within those limitations that we have. And honestly, it is a game changer today. It's going to be much more of a game changer tomorrow because, as Kirsten mentioned, it's evolving very, very quickly. And as long as everyone has that strong foundation of governance and strategic alignment and appropriate intent of solving real business issues, I think AI and related technology can do a lot to expand some of those limitations that we know probably aren't going to change, unfortunately. So we need to do more within the boundaries that we have. And then to Kirsten's comment as well, see you at the HFMA conference in June. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. And with that, we have reached the conclusion of today's webinar. I would like to thank our speakers for presenting and Pointcore for sponsoring. We hope that you found this presentation informative. Thank you for your participation. Have a great day.